Welcome to the Positive Spiritual Living Podcast, brought to you by Unity on the Bay. This is your positive path for spiritual living.
You that are uncomfortable with change, this is your morning to be at Unity on the Bay. We're recognizing the 15th anniversary of 9/11, and in order to do so, we have changed up our service just a bit. It's my honor to invite forward at this time my predecessor as Senior Minister of Unity on the Bay, Reverend William Cameron.
Well, some of you know that he was a teenager when I was a minister, and he grew up on me now, and I am so proud of him.
That was about 10 years ago, wasn't it?
I am retired, but I have not lost my love for this church or this congregation, but I just wanted to share something. 9/11 had a special meaning for me. I was in my bedroom and had a television, and I was dressing, and I saw an airplane go into a big building. Now, I'd been a jet fighter pilot in the Air Force, and I thought, how could anybody be stupid enough to run into a building with an airplane? Then the next one came, and I finally figured out what it was. And there was another thing that really bothered me. My daughter, Heather, who spent her teenage years living right here in this church, was there a graduate student at NYU. And I knew that she and several of her fellow girl students had, to save money, had got an apartment in Brooklyn and had to cross the Brooklyn Bridge on a bus to get there, and they got off right in front of that building, and I knew it was about time. I knew that, and it just, the next 20 minutes were the longest minutes of my life because I thought my daughter was right there. About 20 minutes later, she called, and Dory came up and said, Heather just called, and I don't know what happened, but something happened there, and she wants us to know she was all right. And oh, wow, that was hallelujah. Now, Heather went ahead. She'd already, in her undergrad work, had been a study abroad student in Florence and London, and she eventually taught school in Japan and lived in India. But as time went by, she came home, she was very sick. And what she told me once was that she couldn't go back to Brooklyn, so she stayed with a few friends, but she walked the streets of New York quite a while, breathing all that stuff. We don't know how much that happened, but finally we discovered when we brought her home, they finally diagnosed her with Lyme disease, and she's in Honolulu. And they found out that regular medicine doesn't know much about it, but alternative medicine from Japan and places like that are doing well, and she needed some medication. My dear friend Chris and Eddie and the board gave her a tithe to help for the medication. When I told her that, I could hear the love that she had for these people. Tonight I'm going to call her and tell her that I finally was able to thank you of Unity on the Bay for helping my daughter with love. Thank you.
Love that man. And you too, Dory. Thank you for making it possible for us to be in this room this morning. And speaking of making it possible for us to be in this room this morning, let me take you back to the 1800s. There was a couple living in Kansas City, Missouri, my hometown at the time. She was diagnosed with terminal tuberculosis and given only a short time to live. He had had a crippled leg since childhood, the age of 10, when he was in a skating accident in Minnesota. He was a real estate agent, and nothing was going well. They were in a place of physical and financial desperation. Their names were Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. And if those names sound familiar to you, it's because they are the co-founders of what is today the Worldwide Unity Movement. If you did not know this, our movement was born out of desperation. the desperation of two individuals that through that experience, through that time in their life, made a decision, you see, and the decision was to push through the desperation to the opportunity that lied beyond it. That opportunity for Myrtle was a trip to a lecture in Kansas City by a Chicago metaphysician named Dr. E.B. Weeks. She heard that evening these words, and they changed her life forever. I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. Myrtle recognized herself that evening to be a child of the divine, not a child of the identity that had been prescribed for her by the world of time and space. She realized that beyond the always pressing drama of human existence, there is something of a divine nature that is orchestrating every detail of your life right now this morning, and every detail of the life, the unfoldment of humanity on this planet. And it doesn't stop here. It goes far beyond to an entire cosmos. But you see the significance of the Fillmore's decision that brought forth the movement that made it possible for us to be sitting in this room right now this morning under the banner of unity was to not allow the compelling appearance of desperation to bring them down any further than they already were, but rather to perceive, to experience, to discover another reality. And through that discovery, launch a movement that today has allowed people to recognize this. It's more important to look at what you have in common with other people than what you have as a difference. Commonality, you see. And so they sought to find the spiritual truth underlying all the religious persuasions of the world. It has been distilled down into these 5 principles that you find within this book by Unity Minister Reverend Ellen Davenport. We're going to begin next week a 6-week journey through the pages of this book. You can pick up a copy at the Source Bookstore as you leave today. And during the next 6 weeks, it is our intention through Sunday morning services, through Monday and Tuesday evening discussion groups, through 2 workshops presented by Reverend Elizabeth, to make you intimately acquainted with every one of these 5 principles that I guarantee you will change your life. So that not only you have a better understanding of the unity way of being, but also so that you're in a better position to help other people understand it. Because one of the responsibilities, I believe, sacred responsibilities that we receive as we ourselves become spiritually educated and enlightened, is that we have to carry that torch out into the world. And how many times have you been approached by someone that you knew, maybe someone that you loved, who said, "Unity? What's that?" And how perplexed were you? I guarantee you after this 6-week adventure, you're going to know exactly how to respond. So we go from the 1800s to the early 1990s. And there's a father and a daughter who are not doing well. The family's just experienced a divorce. The father has moved out of the house. The daughter will not speak to the father. And such has been the case for many months. I was that father, and my daughter, Angela, she was the daughter. And it was one of the most difficult periods of my life. Those years of the early 1991 to 1994, or 5 even, were some of the hardest years I've ever encountered. I was desperate. You know, it's always my hope that you'll see me up here on Sunday mornings looking good and espousing these wonderful spiritual truths, and I'm here completely for you in that regard. But those years were very real, very human, and very trying. I was desperate at the time. And anybody that knew me would have agreed with that assessment. And my daughter wouldn't speak to me. The most challenging part was that she wouldn't say the 3 words I always want to hear. Everybody wants to hear from their child or anybody they love, and that is, "I love you." Just this morning as I was meditating, I remembered there was a poem that she wrote to me. This was in the aftermath of some of those most challenging years, but I wanted to share it with you. This was written on Father's Day, June 20th, 2004. I remember as a little girl, you taught me how to walk. And before you knew what happened, I had learned to talk. And through the years, you held my hand as the pony spun round and round and wiped my tears from each cheek before they hit the ground. You helped me off to kindergarten, even through all my fuss. But you taught me to let go at times, and I slowly climbed onto the bus. And then I turned sweet 16, and you taught me how to drive. I will never forget teaching either of my children how to drive a car. You taught me not to take advantage and just thank God that I'm alive. And finally, the time came, and I threw my cap above. But who'd have guessed through all these years I would teach you to truly love? And I'll tell you, my friends, she did. And you know how she did it? Through all those months of not telling me I love you. I didn't know what love was until I recognized that when you love someone and you say, I love you, with absolutely no thought of expectation or return, now you're dealing with real love. No motivation other than it is your desire to express the love in your heart to another person and have it received, whether or not they say anything back to you at all. Well, some of you know that last week I was in the Big Apple, and I was with my daughter, now 31 years old. I had her when I was but a babe. And we had a wonderful time. It was one of the few opportunities we had to be together without the new addition to the family that arrived 5 years ago. That's my granddaughter, Ashlyn Grace. And as much as I love that 5-year-old girl, I love her mama still. And to have that quality time, just the two of us. Now, I was going to New York City because I wanted to have the adventure with my daughter. My daughter, on the other hand, was going to New York City because she wanted to see Hamilton. And see Hamilton we did. I got to tell you, I'd heard all the attention that it had received and so forth, but it didn't really interest me until I was actually there having the experience. The most incredibly synchronized stage production I have ever witnessed. Now get this, as we're waiting for the show to start, I put a picture on Facebook of the empty stage before the performance begins, and I get an immediate response back from Alan Arroyo, who is always here at the 9 o'clock service on Sundays with his wife, Chris. And he says, I'll let Chris know that you're there. She's teaching a class right now. Turns out he goes in and interrupts her in the class. She texts me to tell me that her former student, Alex, is now the musical director of Hamilton on Broadway. And if Angela and I can make it down to the orchestra pit following the show, she's sure we can get to meet him. So that was pretty exciting. After the show, we go down. There's a guard stationed there at the backstage door. He has a list of names of individuals who are allowed to come backstage and meet different people. We're not on that list, but I told him, I said, well, you see, I am really good friends with a lady who's a friend of the guy who's the musical director. He had turned all these people away, but to me, he turns and says, just give me a minute. He goes back, he finds Alex, the music director, who comes out, lets us in. Next thing you know, my dream of being on a Broadway stage came true. Angela and I are both standing on the stage of Hamilton with the set and the performers around us. She's absolutely in ecstasy over this experience. And I realize, who would have ever thought back in the 1990s when we were going through all that hell that we would be here at this moment standing together, immersed in this wonderful sense of love and mutual admiration and gratitude for our relationship, and that it was made possible, and that there was such a divine momentum behind it all, a setup, if you will. All of us remember, I'm sure, exactly what we were doing on the morning of 9/11, 15 years ago. Angela and I took an afternoon to go visit the memorial, and it's beautiful what they've done. I'd seen it before, but not with her. The way those thousands and thousands of gallons of water are pouring down through those fountains in a way that seems to bring a sense of relief and peace and calm to what was such a fiery day those many years ago. And it touched me as it did the last time I was present for it. But even more touching was Wednesday afternoon when I departed New York City. Flew out in a manner that I've never flown out before, I guess, or my eyes weren't open. Because I looked down and I saw the Freedom Tower, the beautiful new structure that they've created beside the site of the Twin Towers. And that was touching. But what was most touching was looking down at these two large black squares on the surface of the planet and realizing that there would never again be two structures placed in those locations again. That this was an event that devastated not only everyone in this country, but really everyone around the world. So you say, well, how in the world could any opportunity possibly come out of that level of insanity, desperation, fear, and truly a total act of terrorism? I found this prayer, a Hindu prayer, written by a Hindu leader shortly following the original 9/11 occurrence. And I wanted to share it with you this morning. It touched my heart, and I believe it may touch yours. A glass shattered, cement crumbled, and steel melted in the inferno of senseless cruelty. The heart of humanity screamed in anguish on a day when the evil potential of misguided ego was again exposed. While our landmarks collapsed in a cloud of smoke and debris beneath a surge of shock and rage, something awakened in our hearts. Think back to that experience, my friends. What awakened in your heart as the devastation began to subside? What was the gift in something with that magnitude of sheer horror? I believe, as a unity minister and as one who espouses the unity way of life, that to whatever degree devastation comes into our life, to that same degree and greater is the possibility of an opportunity emerging. Now, I can't stand before you this morning and tell you what that opportunity is 15 years later, but I can tell you that somewhere in the deepest recesses of your heart, there is a response, a call to a level of compassion, a call to a level of understanding, a call to a level of community and solidarity. How often it is that we find a sense of justification in holding on to our prescription of the way other people need to be. How often will we cling to a resentment from the past or a sense of betrayal, not realizing this, my friends. Every time you are hurt, I am hurt. Every time you are attacked, I am attacked. Every time there is a sense of pain or hurt or agony in any single human heart on the face of this planet, it's mine to endure. It's all of ours to endure. So it makes very practical sense that we lay down these weapons beginning in our own consciousness, beginning by thinking of someone perhaps that you're still holding a grudge about, and making the conscious choice to lay it down, to realize that you're one with that person. If that person is showing you some aspect of life or reality that is displeasing to you, realize in your oneness with that individual that it all lives in you. Now we can take a different approach, you see. Now we can see that as we forgive another, we forgive ourselves. Now we can see that as we extend a peaceful or loving gesture to another person, we are extending it to ourselves. Now we can see the unity of all existence and of all life. Now we can see the possibility of playing the game a different way on this planet, of waking up from our humanity as our vision at Unity on the Bay promises we will do, and be inspired by our divinity. If we in this room this morning will not make that commitment through even the tiniest of changes in our own lives, it will never happen on the face of the planet. But I believe with all my heart that it will happen on the face of the planet, that it is happening, that just beyond the desperation of a couple in the 1800s that resided in Missouri, of a father and a daughter, to all levels of appearances, they would never communicate again, to the catastrophe of 9/11. What you and I must do, what our charge is, my friends, is to know the truth, to press beyond the desperation and see the spiritual reality of one family, one being, one life, one love. Lay down the differences and let us finally master the art of being the human and divine beings that we were created to be. That's the promise of 9/11, my friends. That's the promise of this day, this morning, and every day and every morning of your life. God bless you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Positive Spiritual Living Podcast, brought to you by Unity on the Bay, a spiritual community located in Miami, Florida. Unity on the Bay is supported by the generosity of its community. If you'd like to make a donation or learn more about Unity on the Bay, please visit unityonthebay.org. You can also follow Unity on the Bay on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for even more positive spiritual inspiration. Until next time, thanks for listening and many blessings. Namaste.